Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for watching. This is Daniel Estulin. Welcome to our show in the English channel, Estulin.media, world at large. This is our second episode. With all this stuff happening in Syria and before Syria and so many other places of the world, I think it's important to educate ourselves on the topic of the hybrid warfare, because the modus operandi is the same. And so when we talk about hybrid warfare, we would necessarily be analyzing the specifics of psycho-historical warfare, the technology, in other words, of political coups, cultural codes, cinema, for example, as a kind of tool for moderating political behavior, and also many other interesting things. And so in order to better understand the present, I think it's necessary to look at the past. In particular, if you want to look at the mechanisms of the destruction of the Soviet Union. By the way, the West uses much of what was used in the process of weakening and then breaking up the Soviet Union to destroy the United States today. So they're really not inventing anything new. It's the same thing. And so in practice, if you really think about it, psychological warfare means the transfer of ideological and also political struggle from the sphere of, let's say, theoretical consciousness to the sphere of ordinary consciousness. When one I'd say appeals not so much to the scientific logical arguments, not to reason and not even to facts, but to irrational phenomena. And these include, for example, emotions, instincts, for example, social, national pride, rah, 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 USA, mom, we're number one, sovereign ambitions, instincts of social and national self-preservation, etc., etc. Also, we can talk about prejudices. We could talk about racial prejudices, national prejudices, and also prejudices usually of a traditional historical nature. And this also includes a variety of I could say ideological, mythological constructions from the myths about, for example, Russians being drunkards by nature. Although I don't drink, I've never drank, no one in my family drinks. And most people I know who are from the Soviet Union, they don't drink either. We don't drink vodka. We don't wrestle bears. These are kinds of, lazy cliches about the evil empire and so on and so forth. And so the task of such a transfer of the struggle for one sphere to another is to bring it to the level of everyday psychology in such a way that this struggle permeates all the problems of people's lives and also explains these problems through political confrontation. In other words, make it easy for people to understand by comparing it to something that people already know. And this is achieved due to this massive introduction into the minds of the people of a multitude of false stereotypes of perception and thinking, perverted ideas about the views prevailing in their environment, the events taking place in the world, and the trends developed over time. And so in times of peace, in conditions of this forceful confrontation with a potential adversary, psychological warfare acts as one of the main components of this political confrontation because, again, it's much cheaper, and more safe than a nuclear war. And among the most common methods, I guess, we could distinguish three main methods, speaking of psychological pressure techniques. I'm sure you recognize all of them. For example, ad nauseum repetition of the same false theses, references to authorities in combination with various speculations ranging from distortion of quotes to references to non-existing sources, facts that don't exist. Another point is manipulation, game of figures and facts to create the appearance of objectivity and accuracy. The Soviet Union, the communists killed 100, 200, 300 million people. Well, how'd you get the number? Also, tendentious selection of illustrative material with emphasis on the effects of dramatizing impacts, because people like pictures. And when you tell them something and they have to fill in the rest in the blank with an image, if you give them an image without saying anything, they can usually put two and two together. And although these two things may not have anything to do with anything at all, if you give them a kind of a line to follow, they're going to follow this line to its illogical and wrong conclusion. Also, for example, frightening visual illustrations of propaganda, propaganda views, propaganda positions, other similar techniques designed to create emotional discomfort to neutralize a person's ability to rationally evaluate the information provided. Remember when they talked about Iraqi soldiers were killing babies in incubators in Kuwait? Well, that turned out to be false. But it had the effect. Because, for the most part, people are good people. We don't want to see that kind of stuff happening. The fog of war. And so an example of such a psychological pressures is something called the Goebbels propaganda, which proceeded from the cynical assumption that in order to be effective, it must be massive, it must be blatant, it must be continuous. It doesn't matter if it's true or false. And so in more subtle versions, psychological pressure includes some obviously true elements that are used as a kind of a cover for massive disinformation. Because in any operation, or for any operation to be effective, 5-10% have to be true. And so according to these principles, the world media, provide information, whether we're talking about Libya, whether we're talking about Iran, Syria, Russia, Belarus, China, North Korea, Vietnam, Venezuela, it doesn't matter. Let me give you, as an example, a case of Sudan or Nigeria, Mali, any one of these African countries over there, to illustrate how these leading journalists in mainstream Western media help, shape foreign policy through a blatant propaganda campaign designed, first and foremost, to fool ill-informed Western people, especially Americans. So it starts with this information blitzkrieg from a region in crisis. It doesn't matter, it could be terrorism, it could be famine, it could be major kidnappings, such as the ones we saw not too many years ago of schoolgirls in Nigeria. Emergency calls for help in spreading the situation in the electronic media. Then we have, of course, televised images of refugees, shocking reports of mass rapes, which are no doubt designed to provoke excitement and outrage in equal measure. Then we have, for example, recriminatory evocations of the Rwandan genocide, demands for a reaction. How can we stand by and do nothing? Feature articles in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Newsweek, Time Magazine, CFR's own foreign policy magazine, endless discussions on CNN and Fox and CNBC, etc., calling for a return to the days of Kipling's benevolent imperialism. And finally, the announcement that plans for intervention are indeed being drawn up by the US Congress and the President of the United States. Bravo, shout the American fools. We are number one. Well, we're going to go kick some ass. As if we're talking about a basketball game or a football game. And so the scenario for such an intervention can easily be, again, copied and pasted from past historical events. So first, so you have instability and chaos. They must be created to give the impression that there's a confrontation between, good and bad, or bad and bad. You have the Arabs and the Africans. Because it's always over there, those people, filthy, killing each other. Number two, you have a media campaign must be launched to focus people's attention on the growing instability, and you got to keep that attention. Because so much is going on. You have football games, you have baseball, basketball, Stanley Cup, you have the NCAA basketball finals. And so there's all these other things going on, all these shenanigans happening on the world stage, that people's attention, is there for a couple of minutes and then it's gone. So in order to keep people's attention, this, to have them focused on this particular issue, you need to spend a lot of money. Third, public opinion must be whipped up and highly manipulated. Again, Western population must be furious because they will believe anything. Four, evil this time doesn't matter whether it's Boko Haram, whether it's ISIS, whether it's Putin, whether it's Janjaweeds. They must be made sure to whether they're, on horseback and dressed entirely in black, or riding a bear, with shirtless top, as in Putin's case. And so this last point underlines the strict and unwavering argument of good versus evil. Those Asian savages, as taught to us by another mass propaganda machine, the Hollywood. Number five, the enemy doesn't matter whether it's bloody, smelly Arab terrorists and their partners, needless to say, the Chinese oil companies, I'm a Chinese virus. Russian oligarchs as co-conspirators of this evil dictator Putin, they must be demonized. Point number 6, you have Christian soldiers and their humanitarian armies must be set in. And now you click Save, insert the name in the blank, and use the same formula from now on, again and again, whether it's Syria, whether it's Afghanistan, it doesn't matter when, voila. A movement is born. Point number 7, we must continue to undermine the enemy's power by undermining her credibility through a compliant corporate media whose real owners are the shareholders of the military-industrial concept / Wall Street. So the Venezuelans or the Colombians, the drug dealers, nobody's going to tell you the drugs are laundered through Wall Street. Nobody's going to tell you that those who make all the money from that are the biggest Western banks. Nobody's going to tell you that the mass media gets a big chunk of the profits as a result of these corporations investing in advertising in the mass media to make sure that these kinds of things are never published and never become part of the public consumption. Point number 8, under the banners of high moral approval, 74% of Americans approve, says the latest Gallup poll. And with the full support of the population of the West, we must overthrow the forces of evil. Doesn't matter if it's Islam, if it's Putin's entourage, the damn Chinese, or Arabs, and install a benevolent, peaceful, pro-democratic government. Okay, led by someone whose name we can pronounce. And finally, you remove the sanctions, so they're no longer necessary, and bring the absolutely necessary development, thanks to BlackRock, Vanguard Group and company, to another backward country. And there you have it, another civilizing mission to subdue these hordes of Arabs, barbarians, these hungry, helpless, illiterate, dirty, smelly, sick African tribes, and so on and so on and so forth. Now, another key element of this hybrid warfare is the imperception penetration into the consciousness, as well as hidden violation and distortion of the laws of logic. Because kids in school are never taught to think, to ponder, they're taught to feel. We're always concerned about their feelings being hurt. But the fact is that they're absolutely illogical boobs, and the fact that our logic is hurt as a result of their inability to think is no concern to anyone. So again, as part of this hybrid warfare, this imperceptible penetration into our consciousness, you have substitution of thesis, quoting non-existing sources. So-and-so said so and such a thing. Well, you never said that. Where'd you get that from? False analogies. Conclusion without sufficient reason, substitution of cause by effect, tautology, in other words, saying the same thing twice in different words for greater effect. A lie is a lie is a lie. And so psychological warfare is most effective against the poorly educated strata of society, incapable of grasping rational perversions and inclined to accept purely nominal constructions of faith. But mind you, again, psychological warfare was not only targeted at the Soviets or the communists, but also the Americans themselves through many projects, such as, for example, the MK Ultra. There are 149 sub-projects of the MK Ultra program, many of them related to research into behavior modification, hypnosis, drug effects, psychotherapy, truth serums, pathogens, toxins, etc., etc. All of this I talk about in my book on the Tavistock Institute. Anyway, that's it for today. Thanks for joining us. This is our new show on DanielEstulin.media, the English channel, World at Large, part number 2. See you tomorrow or the day after. Again, thanks a lot, and see you then. Bye-bye.